What is the history of science and why might you want to study it? History of science is the study of how scientific knowledge or scientific ideas developed over time. It gets very little attention in schools. History teachers typically do not teach about the history of science. They focus on the history of political systems, economic systems, wars, military conquests, and so on. And science teachers typically do not teach about the history of science. They focus on teaching about scientific ideas in their present form, not how they originated and developed over the course of centuries or maybe a few thousand years. So the history of science typically gets ignored in both history and science classrooms. Of course, in a university, you will find courses on the history of science offered generally in one of the humanities departments. Now, in high school, science is generally taught and studied with the intention of improving the student's ability to solve applied problems so that they can clear their college entrance exams. Engineering and medicine are two of the most important domains in which science is applied today. But when we study science along with its history, we are not just focused on how science is applied in engineering or medicine today. We are also interested in finding out how scientific knowledge or scientific ideas developed over time to acquire such a prominent place in modern society. For example, when studying the history of science, we might study the astronomy of the ancient Babylonians or the ancient Greeks and try to understand what those ancient people believed about the universe. What did they believe about the stars and planets? And how did their understanding of the universe change and develop over time, over centuries, to give rise to the modern disciplines of astronomy and cosmology? Most people are aware that the dominant model of the solar system in pre modern times was geocentric. Geo means Earth, so the geocentric model had the Earth at the center of the universe with the visible planets Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and the Sun and the Moon revolving around the Earth. So perhaps you can make out in this diagram the Earth at the center, and you can see the planets Mercury, Venus, this is the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn revolving in orbits around the Earth. Now, this is not the model that we accept today. So, why did people in that time think that the geocentric model was true? Were they blind to what should have been clearly obvious to them? Were they sloppy in their reasoning? Were they stupid or less intelligent than us? Or were they just as smart as us today, but still thought that the geocentric model was correct based on good arguments? How did Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, and others, how did these people change those conceptions about the solar system to make the heliocentric model of the solar system become the dominant one? Helios refers to the sun, so the heliocentric model has the sun at the center of the universe with all the planets, including the earth, revolving around the sun. So in this diagram, which is from Copernicus's uh, treatise on heliocentrism, you can see the sun at the center, and you can see the planets Mercury, Venus, Terra is the earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn revolving around the sun. So how exactly did this shift from geocentrism to heliocentrism happen? What were the logical arguments that were given in support of either model? Who were the people involved in these debates? And what sort of political views or religious factors or sociological factors influenced these people at that time? It may surprise some of you to know that politics, religious beliefs, and social factors can strongly shape one's scientific ideas. And how did those scientific ideas in turn influence back the society? What impact did they have on politics? What impact did they have on religion? You probably know that Galileo got into trouble with the Catholic Church over his heliocentric views. So, what exactly were his views? And what were the views of the authorities in the church? And what really happened between Galileo and the church? Was it a simple story of a dogmatic church punishing Galileo, the open minded scientist? Or is the story more complicated than that? And after the success of heliocentrism, how did the heliocentric model itself give way to the modern conceptions about the solar system and the universe? In the modern conception, even the sun is not at the center of the universe. The sun is just one among innumerable stars in our Milky Way galaxy. And our galaxy is just one among innumerable galaxies in the universe. So there is no object that we can point to and argue to be the natural center of the universe. So, how did that happen? So, this should give you some idea about what sort of questions are studied in the history of science. The questions we just saw were only questions from astronomy, and even in the long history of astronomy, these were only a few of the questions. So, what you might notice from even this small sample of questions that we just saw is that they were not about using memorized formulas to solve numerical problems in some exam. So, why are such questions useful to pursue today? And in general, why should one study the history of science? Let's look at some reasons.